Chapter 21. Family Ties. "Are you coming?" Pete uttered, clumsily turning back to the door. Cy stood with Eve and Sam as they all exchanged awkward glances. "Well, we still have to do our choosing," they replied, pointing toward the stadium. I wanted to kick myself. I was so annoyed by the circumstances, it completely slipped my mind. I rose begrudgingly, grabbing my bag, and followed them. "We'll be back," I replied to the transporter, as they all exhaled, happy to see I hadn't been completely overtaken by the selfish spirit I was acting like. "I'm sorry, you guys. I forgot about your choosing." "It's fine," Cy replied, turning to walk as we headed back toward the stadium. Sam walked without saying a word. I would have normally thought it was because he was nervous about the trials, but his demeanor was aggressive. He stared at me, shaking his head a couple times. I let it go on as long as I could, but it was obvious he was angry with me. It became the pink elephant in the room as we walked. Everyone could see it, and it was causing tension throughout our walk. I finally got to my wit's end, angrily turning to the boy. "What's your problem?" I cut. "You got something to say to me?" Sam stopped, clenching his bag, stopping in his tracks. He turned to me with an angry stare. "Yeah, I do," he fired. "That's your brother." I raised a brow, surprised by his statement. "Yeah," I said, trying to quell my anger. "Good deduction, Sam. Unfortunately, everyone from my dad to the lady selling popcorn at Angel Haven High knows that. What's your point? One more time. What's your problem?" He stared at me, steadfast in his anger as he continued. "Your brother just did something that no one has ever done before," he shot angrily. "And he returns to his Legion, which he just pulled from the fire for the umpteenth time, and half of the Legion isn't there to congratulate him. There's nothing wrong with that picture to you?" I stared at him, angrily looking him over. "Sam, I made a mistake. What do you want from me? I said I was sorry," I shot angrily. He scoffed, looking around at the rest of the crew, shaking his head in a "I told you so" type of manner. "This isn't about you," he replied. "Where you go, they follow." I glared at him with a helpless shrug. "I didn't ask anybody to follow me," I fired. He shook his head, showing an ironic smirk. "You know what, Tim? I don't doubt that, but it doesn't matter. Whether you accept it or not, they follow you. It makes me sick," he shot, his temper running over. "Everyone follows you. In school, the football team, everywhere. You never ask for anyone to look up to you or follow your lead. I get that, but people do. And it's all about the talent you have, the way you are. They just think you're so cool. It's all I ever hear. How everyone wants to be like Timothy Eli. How everyone loves Timothy Eli." His words sent an unsettling feel through the Legion. They all lowered their heads in embarrassment as he emptied his soul. It was obvious the boy had been holding this in for a while, but he caught me at the absolute worst time to unburden himself. "I'm cool?" I shot, blown away by his words. "I'm cool? What's so cool about me? What, Sam? The fact that I'm a constant mess-up? How I destroy everything I come in contact with? What? The people who think that I'm this guy you're talking about, they can't know me." He looked around at the ground as his head subconsciously fell. The rest of the group continued to watch our spat, awkwardly staring at us like it was a car wreck they couldn't look away from. Sam's fists clenched as he finally raised his head. "I'm a mess-up!" he screamed, catching everyone's attention. His words were like daggers. I got his point, but it was apples and oranges. Our situations were totally different. My anger picked up as I stared around at the forming crowd. "Beth is a mess-up," he continued, pointing at the girl as he spoke. "We fight to do things you guys do with ease. We are mess-ups. You're a mess-up?" He spoke his words with an offended chuckle. Do you have any idea how it is for us to do the most basic things, Tim? He shot, staring me in the eyes angrily. We deserve those titles. We embrace and shatter them, but you don't get to do the same. It lowers our accomplishments. You're not a mess-up. Man, you're a genius. He responded, stepping toward me as Eve stepped in between us. Okay, guys, maybe we should take inventory of our surroundings, she cut, cautiously looking around, embarrassed. Sam casually acknowledged before continuing, unaffected by her objections. You know what's funny? You say those people can't know you, right? But honestly, that's just hilarious. I thought it was an act, but truthfully, you are the most clueless person I've ever met. Newsflash, those people are standing right here, right now. Go ahead, check their BAUE thing and see if you can find one of them who doesn't feel that way. One of these people who can't know you. Then tell me I'm wrong, he shot, angrily pointing at my friends as he spoke. I just stood staring at him, trying my best to control my temper. I tried my best to be mindful of doing anything to further hurt Sam's morale, but he was pushing me to my limit. He didn't understand the predicament I was in as Jacob's brother. Worst yet, I was starting to wonder if they all saw me in that way. Did they really see me as this prodigy? I looked around at them as they all let their eyes dance, subconsciously affirming Sam's words. I turned back to him, livid as he continued. And if you have the time after you've finished checking them, check mine and see if you don't get the same answer, he replied passionately. Because from the time I met you, all I wanted to do was be as cool as you were. I trained from dusk till dawn, and guess what? They don't make it possible for people like me to do things that people like you do, and I can accept that. Do you have any idea how special you are? Do you know how many people would kill for the chance to be half as talented as you are? We all watch in awe at the things you've done and continue to do, and accept you're on another level. So why can't you do the same when it comes to Jake? Why can't you accept that there is someone that makes you feel the same way you make everyone else feel? He shot, continuing with no filter. I stared at him, squinting angrily, seconds away from exploding as I stared at the gathered crowd. No, instead we have to watch you sulk and complain about how unfair life is. The nerve! We have to be rude because you are jealous that for once someone else has the spotlight, he accused, sending my emotions into overdrive. I stared at the sky, biting my lips, trying to keep the anger rushing to the surface at bay. His words sparked an anger in me like nothing I've ever felt before. It was the words I heard my entire life, my whole life. The common theme was I was jealous of my brother, and I hated that narrative. No one knew what it was like to be me. I grew up idolizing my brother. I wanted to be him, and it was what everyone expected. But by the first grade, I realized that wasn't ever going to be a fair comparison. Jacob was a true prodigy, both mentally and physically. I wasn't. We were so close in age, and with the small population of our town, it was hard to get out from under my brother's shadow. I accepted the fact that I was talented, and it wasn't my fault others felt I made them seem average, but I'm not their older brother. They weren't constantly being compared to me. They couldn't understand the pressure of one person making your life a prison. My demeanor and disposition were directly correlated to my experience with my brother. I was content with average because at least then I had my own identity. It beat falling short of Jacob's legend day in and day out. I realized when I did the minimum, comparisons were non-existent. They accepted my limitations and left me alone. It saved me from the depression. Jacob left a mark on everyone he met and a standard for me to follow. When teachers and coaches come across a child like my brother, they almost craved another one just like them. As his brother, I was the perfect candidate, and they wasted no time in letting me know every way I fell short when I didn't live up to one of his many exceptional feats. It didn't matter that I did better than everyone else. I wasn't Jacob, and that's what everyone expected me to be. No matter how well I did, I was a failure. Sam couldn't understand this. His history with me wasn't lengthy enough for him to grasp. Any other time I would have given him a pass, but the fact that he made light of my situation infuriated me. All I got was the insult. To make such an ignorant statement in front of so many bystanders was beyond inconsiderate, and I had finally met my limit. "Are you serious?" I replied, walking toward him. "Are you saying I walked out because I want his spotlight? You think I would ever do that? You've known me for almost 3 years. When have I ever cared about spotlight?" Sam met my eruption in anger without backing down, meeting me as I walked toward him. "When it's Jacob's spotlight," Sam fired. "Always!" My power burst forward, causing everyone around us to back down. My friends quickly went on high alert. I headed towards Sam with a menacing look on my face. "Take it back, Sam!" I shot angrily. Before I could take a step, Sai was standing in front of me, and she wasn't looking to block. I knew the look on Sai's face, and she meant business. "Stop it, Tim!" she replied, glaring at me. I looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Sai, move," I replied, dismissing her actions as an over-exaggeration. She didn't budge. She stood blocking my path. She held Sam back as he frantically worked to get around her. "If you want to fight somebody, fight me," she shot angrily. "I don't know if you want the spotlight, but I do know what you did was extremely rude, and I can't believe I followed you. Sam is right. Tim, we follow you sometimes to a fault. We should have said something. I'm just glad Sam woke us up." I stared at the crowd surrounding around us before returning my gaze to her. My emotions caused more of my light tattoos to become visible, causing more of a stir. "Sai, are you serious?" I pressed, offended by her actions, blind to the appearance of my energy tattoos. Before I could blink, Eve and Pete shot next to Sai's side, shielding Sam as well. My heart dropped. What did they truly think of me? In all actuality, I had no plans of ever fighting Sam. I smirked, still controlling the wave of emotions flowing through me at the time. "Do you know if I wanted to hurt Sam?" I shot through gritted teeth. "All I'd have to do is... flash!" I dematerialized through them in a flash, landing behind Sam with my back turned to them. They quickly turned around, unable to keep up with my speed. "Swing! Catch!" Sam took a swing at me that I caught with one hand as they looked on with the crowd in awe of my power. I have put my life on the line for nearly everyone in this legion at one point or another. I have never asked for a thing in return. Don't you get it? I don't want fame. I didn't even want to be here. I just want what I've always wanted, and that's to be normal," I replied, powering down. "You talk about my talent and how many people would kill for it. Well, guess what? I'm not one of those people. I know the limitations of this talent. It isn't enough to remove the weight that is on my shoulders, not by a long shot. My destiny was chosen the day I was born, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine just sitting in the background being the normal Eli kid. I don't want his fame. I don't want his skill. I don't want his power. I want to be left alone to fail or succeed based on my standards and my merit, but no one gives me that chance. I'd give up this power in a second if I was judged on the same scale as everyone else. I am always paired with and against my brother, and I'm tired of walking around with the weight of the destiny his greatness demands. That's a weight none of you will ever understand." Sam lowered his head as I tossed his hand to the side, staring at them all, disappointed. I have tried to be what you guys want me to be. I'm burning the candle on both ends. Every night I'm pushing myself to my absolute limit to make sure I'm here to make up for the danger I've put you guys in. I accept that burden because it was my decision that brought you here, but I'm still human. I'm not Jacob. I don't always do the right thing, yet somehow it's always what's expected of me. I walked out of the stupid trial celebration because for the first time since we've been here, I needed a second to compose myself. I need a second to focus on my mental state. I never asked any of you to follow me. You decided to do that. I didn't prevent any of you from celebrating Jacob's victory, yet you're here blaming me for decisions you chose to make. You sit here looking down your noses at me for walking out on your hero Jacob's win. Yet Jacob cuts me down every second he gets, and no one was ever there to be offended by his undermining of my contributions. I bust my butt for this Legion, and he's always there to tell me where I fell short, and none of you are there to defend me. None of you show this sudden camaraderie. You laugh and make things worse. So let me say this to appease the severe pain I've caused you. Sincerely, I apologize for disrespecting the contributions of a person that disrespects my contributions daily, with no hurt feelings or rebuttals from any of you. Sai's eyes dropped at the sound of my words. They all showed slumped shoulders as the crowd stood in silence after my words. I shook my head as she moved toward me. I raised my hand, stopping her. Tim, she managed before I brushed past her, shaking my head. Just save it, Sai, I shot, shaking my head with my back still turned to them. If you guys think I would attack Sam after all I've done to make up for what I did to him, you guys don't know me. You guys were powering up to fight me in front of all these people based on your perception of who I am. So stop trying to feed me some garbage about unwittingly following me. Please. You followed me, you don't follow me. You follow him and that's fine. But don't speak on my life, because none of you have walked a mile in my shoes. Even Sam seemed visibly contrite as he clenched his fists staring at the ground. An awkward silence ensued. Before Sai shook her head, refusing to let things end on such a harsh note. Flash! She flashed in front of me, stopping with an extended arm. She forced the hood off my head as she spoke apologetically. Tim, you're right, she sympathized, calming me. We overreacted, but all the same, whether you want to take ownership or not, we do follow you. And Sam was right. Just like you can't help people comparing the two of you, neither can your brother. Tim, he didn't deserve that. And yeah, it was a momentary lapse, but I'm not angry because you made a mistake. I'm mad because that was the first thing your mind told you to do. You are always so selfless when it comes to the rest of us, but it's like when it comes to Jacob, all you see is red. That isn't fair to him, you, or us. It shortchanges you and your brother, and it puts us in the middle. I lowered my head, taking in her words as she continued. And another thing, don't throw us in with everyone else. They don't know you, we do. And to those of us that care about you, you're so much more than Jacob's little brother, she shot, forcing me to look into her eyes before hugging me. I know, Sai, I responded, hugging her back. But you're right about us. We did what we did. We didn't have to, but at the end of the day, it's what we're going to do. Whether you accept it or not, we follow you. So keep that in mind. Every mistake you make, we're probably going to be on your heels making the same ones. That's the weight of your spirit and talent, not Jacob's. Jacob may inspire strangers to follow him because of what he can do, but just as important, you inspire those that know you because of what you've done. Realize when you make a decision, it doesn't matter what they think. She pointed around at the bystanders with one hand, while placing her free hand on my cheek. We follow you. You can't afford to make the same mistakes as the rest of us, because the mistakes you make affect the rest of us. Everyone standing in front of you, we follow you. We said we trust you with our lives, which means every decision you make has to consider us. Get used to that dynamic. You wanted that trust? Well, guess what? You got it. I don't want to hear the crying now, she explained with a snicker, causing me to follow suit, lowering my head with an embarrassing chuckle. Sam snapped us all out of that funk. We should be thanking him. I'm not angry that he addressed the elephant in the room, even if the way we all handled the situation made things worse. I accepted her words with the level of gravity it deserved. I stared into her eyes with admiration and appreciation for who she was. I twiddled with the strap on my bag before hugging her. "Tim, go ahead," Pete cut in. "The rest of us will meet you afterwards. Jacob should be getting back from the council any minute. We'll just meet you at the hotel." I accepted his words, awkwardly waving, feeling subconscious about our tirade in front of the small crowd of people. I knifed through the crowd and headed toward the transport. Sam wasn't as receptive to the reconciliation. Of course, he felt a level of guilt for the way he attacked me, but that didn't soothe the level of anger he felt for leaving in the midst of my brother's celebration. He rocked awkwardly for a second, then walked away, following the group. I contemplated Sai's words on my way back to the transport before I heard commotion behind me that stopped me in my tracks. "It was an accident, kid," I heard Eve protest loudly. "He was chosen. He couldn't control what he was doing." I turned to see Sam with a groggy look on his face. He was arguing with Kel, who was accompanied by Abby, Sean, Cadmiel, and a little girl. Things were getting testy. I started to just leave before I sighed and walked toward them in a relenting manner. "What's going on?" I asked, walking up. They all became more reserved as I approached. Even Sean began to tense up. "Nothing," Sai shot, trying to cut me off before I got too close. "Sam was chosen." My heart went into my throat. Even after what just had transpired, my heart went out to him, and that was just one of the emotions flowing through me at the sound of her words. Another was regret. The tension between us would not be a good way to start Sam's trials, and on top of that, what luck we had for him to be chosen with one person left to be chosen. It was just rotten luck for Sam. He just stood with a dreary look on his face as the volatile atmosphere around him became more and more hostile. Sai pointed in his direction before stopping in a sympathetic manner. "When he did his BAU conference, he stopped for a second and hit this guy," she replied, pointing in Kel's direction. I turned to him as he stood impatiently listening to Sai's explanation. "I don't care if it was an accident," he replied. "It don't mean squat. He made me drop my drink." As he spoke, Sean stepped in between he and Sam. He and Abby stood as barriers with their backs to Sai and Pete, keeping Eve and Sam away from Kel and Cadmiel. "Kel, stop the crap. Let's just go," he replied, angrily shoving the boy back. "Yeah, this kid isn't worth it," Cadmiel added, pulling him back. Eve forced her way toward her at the sound of her words, as Sai pushed back, blocking her. "If she comes near me, I'm going to put her head through a wall," Cadmiel warned, going from mediator to aggressor at Eve's display. "Yeah, you had your chance, and if it wasn't for Sai, you'd be lying in a hospital bed," Eve cut, seething as Sai forcefully pushed the girl back. Cadmiel surged toward Eve as Sean and Sai were almost touching nose to nose, keeping the two legions apart. I stood watching like a deer in headlights. "Stop it!" Sean screamed. "Why don't you guys just get out of here?" Pete shot. "Why don't you?" Abby shot back. Just as things were at a head, Jade arose from the double doors like a godsend.
"What's going on here?"
he replied with a surprised look on his face. Everyone stopped and dispersed, like kids caught doing something wrong when an adult enters a room. "Nothing," I replied as Jade approached. He watched as the ABA Legion walked away, looking back in a warning manner.
"Where were you guys?"
Jade replied.
"I've been looking all over the place for you."
I looked away, embarrassed, as I could feel everyone's attention lock on me. Jade stood in a surveying glare for a second before continuing.
"Sam,"
he replied empathetically.
"what's the story?"
He shrugged his shoulders as laughter erupted from inside the facility, turning our attention toward our surroundings. It was coming from the media section. They were all crowded around a monitor behind a glass door next to the entrance.
"Let's go,"
Jade replied suddenly. I looked at his eyes, not really wanting to follow his orders.
"Let's go,"
he said, this time more assertive. He shoved Eve forward, pointing for us all to head for the transport. As he did, I turned to see the media flooding toward us. Jacob and the rest of the Legion poured out of the door, walking at an accelerated rate. "What is going on?" I asked, speeding up my walk to keep up. "Get on the bus, Tim," Jacob replied, shoving me forward. We all trotted on the bus as the transport door closed. "Go, go!" Max screamed as the transport pushed the bus in gear and shot off. "Will someone tell me what's going on?" I shot, looking around the transport in an annoyed tone. They all sat quiet before Sai signaled for me to come to the back of the transport. I followed suit, heading toward her. "What?" I replied, plopping down beside her. I looked around at the awkward feel in the transport, and I couldn't understand it. It was like someone had died, and it was starting to make me uneasy. Sai signaled for me to be quiet, putting one finger over her mouth. I cut my eyes to object, but before I could, a surge of energy shot through me. It was a BAU feed of information fired into my brain like I was watching a fast-action trailer. I blinked uncontrollably when it finally relinquished. I tried to come to grips with whether or not what I just witnessed was real. "Did that really happen?" I whispered, turning to Sai. She nodded emotionally. "Sam, I couldn't believe it. Sam had gone through his evaluation and had scored an amazing 1 out of 12. Jacob's score was as amazing as his score was disappointing. The laughter we heard in the lobby, all the commotion, I saw it all. They laughed at Sam. "Well, what do we do?" I replied. Just as I spoke, Jade stood up, catching everyone's attention.
"Even though we didn't assume his score would be this bad, it doesn't change the overall plan. We all assumed Sam would probably have to do a duel and an undertaking," he replied. "Exactly," Max seconded. "Of course, we understand the disappointment on Sam's part." Sam sat unemotionally looking out of the window, not saying a word as Max continued. "What difference does it make?" I asked. "Well, for one, he no longer can do the undertaking alone. Someone else has to do it with him, and it has to be someone who has already been accepted into the academy. More importantly, it can't be Jacob because he just competed, and there is a 2-day waiting period before a prospect is eligible to compete again," Jade explained in an upset manner. My eyebrows almost touched the back of my skull. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" I replied. The whole time I thought I was in the clear after my trial, and to have this thrown on me at this time was a little more than I could bear. "Well, no one has ever scored so low. The average lower-level prospect could apply and at least get a 2. It's extremely rare to get a 2. I should have seen this coming, but I was naive. I thought Sam's heritage would be enough to suffice, but I underestimated the prejudice of some of the council members. I can't believe them!" he exploded angrily. "Even if he does make it with the assistance, there must be a trial to decide whether or not he will be accepted unless he wins his duel. It's preposterous!" I felt for Sam, but I was also angry and confused. Now the atmosphere on the transport made sense. The media waited behind the media line as we pulled up.
"Sam,"
Jade pressed as he leaned toward him.
"you have your press conference?"
Sam stared at him without saying a word and threw his backpack over his shoulder and headed toward the door. "It doesn't matter," he replied angrily. "I just want to kick these guys' butt and go home." We all sat watching him as he made his way off the bus. He was like a blank page. He had no emotion. He looked totally drained. After everything he went through since we arrived, it all made sense. The media launched questions at him as he cut through the crowd and went into the hotel. No one said a word. We all just sat in silence. "Why is it always that kid?" Luke replied. "I mean, this SOC thing, is it really that bad?" Max looked over at Jade in a begging manner. Jade nodded, permitting him to continue as he began. "Look, we didn't want to tell you guys this so soon," he replied, taking a long, exhaustive breath. "The prejudice against Sam is in part because he is a SOC, but there are many SOCs in our society in prominent positions. Majority of times it's harder because of all the prejudice about them, but generally, once they showcase their ability, they're accepted fairly quickly." Danielle sat forward at the sound of Max's words. "Yeah, I noticed there seemed to be something different about the way Heaven Realm higher-ups treated Sam. The way the council members and people in the media talked about him," Danielle replied, catching our attention. "I've never seen them like that so openly." Max nodded, continuing his speech. "Yes, well, there is a reason for that," he continued. "What I am about to tell you guys, you must not under any circumstance tell Sam. I need your word on this." As he spoke, he waited for us to agree. We all nodded, agreeing to his terms as he continued. "Only the most senior, aged Heaven Realm residents know this. It isn't common knowledge, but there is something you all should know about him," he replied. "Well, more so, his father." His words caught our attention immediately. My antennas had been up ever since we had met Sai's mother. "See, I told you," I said, turning to Eve. Max and Jade followed up, surprised. "You know about this, Tim?" Jacob replied. I shook my head, raising my hand in a tempering manner. "Well, I knew something was up," I continued. "You remember when Sai was in the hospital and we met her mother?" They all nodded in succession. "Yeah, Eve told me about it. She said something about it being weird that your parents never explained to you guys that you were related, even though they were the ones who brought Sam to Angel Haven," Sai cut in. I nodded, pointing in her direction, affirming her statements. "Precisely," Jade continued. "There was a reason for it. Sam is your blood cousin, and so is his brother Isaiah." I leaned forward, pulled in by every word. "The brother that Sam killed in the fire," I replied, spilling the beans. Everyone's gaze shot to me the minute I spoke. I wanted to backpedal, but I said too much to turn back. "Wait, what?" Eve replied. "Sam told you this?" Jade replied in an inquisitive manner. I sighed, trying to calm everyone down. "No, well, yes, I guess, but it was an accident," I replied. "It was that weird white flame. He said when he was small he couldn't control it. Well, he still can't really control it now, but when he was small, he said he really couldn't control it. It would happen involuntarily. It was terrible. He kind of told me that one night he awoke and the whole place was on fire, and they couldn't save his brother."
Everyone's countenance fell at the sound of my words. Even I had to stop and think of all the things he'd been through. I just couldn't understand how a kid could get kicked in the face as much as he did and still have such strong faith. He was such a happy-go-lucky kid. You would never guess he had such tragedy in his life. I never saw him pouting or making excuses. I thought back on his words to me just minutes earlier, and the sting was worse. It's why my attitude ate at him. This is a guy who hadn't had a family his entire life, and here I was complaining about mine. Compared to what he had gone through, I could see why he thought I was being an arrogant jerk.
Man, how much can anyone take? Uriah added. The kid has no parents, no family, no friends, and has endured unspeakable tragedies throughout his entire life, yet he's the most upbeat and positive kid I've ever met. I mean, how?
Jade ignored Uriah's statement and pressed me, as if something I said had caught his attention.
So, Sam believes he killed his brother?
He responded. I nodded, agreeing with his statement. Why? I pressed. He paused before relenting.
Sam's brother isn't dead,
Jade responded. His words floored all of us. We all looked at him in complete and utter disbelief.
What do you mean?
Pete replied. Jade once again rolled his eyes in a relenting fashion before continuing.
Listen, I'll get to that. But first, let me explain Sam's father to you, and it'll explain itself,
he replied.
Sam's father, or Tim and Jacob's uncle's name, is Philip Rothman.
His words almost made me swallow my tongue.
Philip Rothman?
Eve pressed.
The richest man in the world, the head of the AARM. Are you serious?
Pete added.
No way,
Sai uttered, shaking her head, speaking in a gasping tone.
Talk about a punch in the gut,
Luke added. We all looked queasy at the sound of his words. We didn't know how to react. I had known Sam for years, but it was going to be hard for me to look at him the same again. Imagine if I didn't know him. Suddenly, the treatment he received was starting to make sense. Now the actions of the prospect at the trial celebration made more sense. Somehow he knew.
Who is this guy?
Danielle added. In our realm, there is a group of vigilantes that go around killing Christians and all resemblance of Christianity in our society. They've been around since the biblical days, going by different names, and infiltrating different sects of society, recruiting until they formed an army that even our own government had to contract just to keep them in check, Jacob explained. The Rothmans are the richest family in our world. They're a controlling part of the Council of 13. They are the most powerful family in the world.
Wow, so you guys are like princes,
Zach replied. Us? No, Jacob replied. That's not how it works in our realm. Power isn't passed like that, especially not in the Council of 13. Max cleared his throat, calling for attention before continuing. Regardless, he put in, Philip wasn't always like that. You're right, Jacob. Your mother's family is the most powerful family in your realm, but neither she nor her brother had any idea. We all settled down as he continued. Why didn't they know? I pressed. It felt like a long time coming. I wanted to know about my mother for so long. I couldn't believe somebody was finally going to tell me. Jacob leaned forward attentively as well. Your grandmother, Natasha, the mother of your mother and uncle. She was the mistress of James Rothman. After years of abuse, your grandmother became pregnant with your mother. Afraid of your grandfather's occult practices and abuse, she wanted to protect her child, so she fled without ever revealing to James that she was pregnant. It worked for a while, but with the evil forces in your world, there was nowhere she could run where he couldn't find her. And when she finally gave birth to your mother, she went to the one place where she knew your mother would be safe. She went to a church during the great religious wars of the early 2050s and met a young pastor named Thomas Matthews. He protected and looked after Natasha and her newborn child. Eventually, he fell in love with the woman and took her as his wife and your mother as his child. Covered in the Holy Spirit, the evil spirits in the world lost track of Natasha as she married and developed a new name. It was a chance meeting at a southern conference where a false prophet came across Thomas and Natasha. James had now ascended to the top of the Rothman family and now had unlimited power. It wasn't long before he tracked down your grandmother and mother. James was still infatuated with Natasha and pursued her, but she turned him down and spurned his affections. James was not used to his advances being unrequited, and in a fit of rage, he gave the order to have Natasha's husband killed. Once her husband was executed, he warned her that if she ever found another mate, he wouldn't only kill them, but her and Leah as well. The more of the story he told, the madder I became. I could tell the feeling was mutual as I looked around the transport. Soon she became pregnant again, and like the first time, she was afraid of the occultic practices of the Rothmans, Max continued. But this time, unable to live a lie, she refused, and finally revealed in a fit of rage that Leah was his child, in an attempt to show him the beauty of life. He acknowledged her words by stating he would groom your mother when she became old enough, but the other child had to be a sacrifice for his bid to make the High Council, because he wasn't about to sacrifice any of his legitimate kids. He stated he would give her 9 months, and she had to decide which one of her children would die. It was her choice. My jaw clenched at the sound of his words. I couldn't believe this was my heritage. I couldn't believe that someone who was so closely related to me could be so evil. I couldn't accept it. Natasha prayed and prayed for an answer, and because of the stress of the ordeal, she decided to flee. But unlike the last time Natasha fled, the world was in chaos. The religious wars were at their height. Many false prophets had infiltrated the church at that time, and new members were no longer accepted as freely as they were before. In her state, she didn't get too far before the stress of her situation caused her to go into premature labor. With no money, no identity, and a 3-year-old child, she died in labor, he continued. Leah and Philip never knew their mother, and grew up bouncing from foster home to foster home, never knowing anything about who they were or what happened to their parents. Leah was a beautiful girl who generally made friends quickly. She had a magnetic personality that just attracted people to her. She was a great student, athlete, and Christian. Philip was the complete opposite. He was a violent and angry kid. He was constantly getting in trouble and causing problems, which made it impossible for he and Leah to stay anywhere. They were a package deal, and she got kicked out of as many homes as he did because she refused to leave him behind. As they got older, Philip only got worse. He finally did something that got him put into a boys' home for 2 years when he was around your age. It was a blessing for Leah. She blossomed in his absence and was adopted by a well-off family in Lincoln Springs almost immediately. Once there, she met your father and the rest of your parents after being adopted by Sai's grandparents, the Hikaris. I chuckled under my breath, smiling at the irony.
I guess I see why Dad was so quick to take me in, Luke cut with a smile.
Iggy was the complete opposite of Philip. He was everything she wanted Philip to be. She couldn't have asked for a better life, Max continued. It was there she met Adam and Jacob Sr. Jacob, who had been a remnant and was passing his anointment on to his son, asked Michael if he could create and train his own legion to help mankind in the late religious wars. He wanted to prepare them for the trials. Naturally, Michael agreed. Adam chose a few of his friends, and it was Jacob who chose your mother and a few of her friends to round out the group. Your father, seeing her as the controlling presence of his father, actively despised her when she first arrived. But watching her loyalty and talent, he soon became infatuated with her. They trained in the heaven realm for years, but constantly fell short, with Adam and Leah being the only ones accepted trial after trial. Finally, on the eve of Leah's 18th birthday, Philip was released. Leah explained and shared everything she knew and learned with Philip for the entirety of his stint in prison. So when he was finally released, he was an extremely experienced remnant. Adam and the rest of the Legion didn't know him well enough to trust Philip, but they trusted Leah's judgment wholeheartedly. No one could have seen what type of person Philip was.
What do you mean? I asked. Philip was an exceptional remnant, but he was a double agent from the beginning, Jade cut in. How? Eve added. Jade turned to her with a look that fell between surprised and empathetic. He sighed before turning to us in a leveling manner. Well, Jacob, he replied, catching all our attentions. Jacob Sr. His words slowed my beating heart as I nodded, trying to keep a calm demeanor. Jacob himself seemed to be at ease to hear Jade say my grandfather's name. Still, his words were polarizing. My grandfather? What did he have to do with Sam's father going rogue? I leaned forward attentively as he continued. Jacob, like Tim, chose a legion. He knew the risk of bringing Philip on, but he trusted that your mother would bring him over like you did with Luke. But unlike you guys, they weren't dead. Things weren't as obvious or cut and dry as going to retrieve a lost soul. There was no jarring experience to judge. Philip was trained from the time he was very young. His father found him through the evil forces in your world when he entered the juvenile center. He met his father, who already knew about your mother's training. He disclosed to Philip who his mother was and told him of his heritage. Lucifer turned him before your mother could get to him. Your grandfather knew how powerful your mother was because of the many double agents here in the heaven realm who saw her excel time after time in the trials. So, he used Philip in a plan to dispose of your mother. But why just their mother? Sai replied. Why not the entire Legion? He turned to her with an apologetic shrug. At the time, she was the Legion, he replied. And even if it meant taking out his daughter, he was willing to do it to keep his spot on the council. He stopped, shaking his head in a sorrow-filled manner. We lost contact with the Legion after they graduated from the academy, but I always suspected he would be the downfall of that Legion, Max interrupted. Why? I pressed. Leah was as protective of him as Jacob is of you, he replied, pointing at the two of us. She let her guard down around him and would sacrifice herself for him without hesitation. Jacob leaned forward. I stared at him, anticipating what his words would be as he opened his mouth to speak. So, is that how she died? He replied, bringing everyone else in. Jade shrugged his shoulders, turning to Max. He avoided eye contact as he continued. We don't know, Max replied in an embarrassed tone. What do you mean you don't know? Jacob shot back angrily. Why don't you know? Max stood for a second, as if to be composing himself, then turned and walked off the transport angrily. We all stood confused by his display, as Jade turned to us in a sympathetic show. What's the matter with him? I asked. Why is he leaving? Jade stopped and sighed in a relenting fashion. He doesn't know what happened to your parents because it's classified, he replied. How? Wasn't he the Legion's host? Pete pressed. Jade shook his head no. He has the ability to, but he's been hesitant to delve into it, he replied. He stood as we all stared at him, expecting him to continue, but he was unrelenting as he stared at us unapologetically. That aside, the point for me telling you guys this is to explain the reason for the bias towards Sam. The rest is classified. I can't tell you until you've graduated from the academy and joined the Light Guard, so leave it alone," he replied. He cleared his throat as we all gave varying glances as he continued.
Sam's mother Samantha was pregnant with Sam when it all came out,
he continued, pulling us back. "What? When what came out?" Luke pressed.
"Shut up so he can tell us, Luke,"
Sai commanded.
Sam's father was allegedly the chosen one of Satan. He is believed by many in this realm to be the Antichrist,
Jade replied, shocking everyone.
"What?"
Eve replied.
"Sam's father? Tim's uncle is the Antichrist?"
"You have got to be kidding," Danielle added.
"That's scary,"
Zek replied. The dynamic of the room was completely different. You could hear a pin drop. No one wanted to speak. No one wanted to be the first to interject. No one knew what to say.
"It's just a theory,"
Jade replied.
"No one knows for sure. But from the moment it was assumed, Samantha, his brother, and Sam went into hiding. Samantha was lost to Philip, and the kids were lost. Both Adam and Philip searched desperately for the kids. It didn't take long to find them. A battle ensued, and Philip caused a fire that burned down Sam's home and took his brother."
So, the demon Sam was talking about, the one his guardian was trying to keep Sam away from, was Sam's father? I pressed, flabbergasted. Jade gave a nonverbal nod and continued.
"After the battle, Sam was lost. Luckily, Adam and Leah didn't give up. They eventually found Sam and brought him to Angel Haven,"
he responded, obviously hiding something as he navigated the story. "So, why did Sam's brother get taken but not Sam himself?" Jacob replied.
"Your parents showed up in time to save his brother,"
JDL replied.
"I don't know the details, but Sam has been under their protection ever since. Soon a war started between the DOL and Philip. Angel Haven became a battlefield."
He paused in a deeply regretful way. We all watched, unable to understand why.
"And unfortunately, it led to the death of a lot of your parents,"
he finally disclosed, dropping a pipe bomb. His words were a hard pill to swallow. We all sat in shock. You could hear a pin drop. An uncomfortable silence ensued before Zek finally cut in.
"So why didn't they just let his father have him?"
Zek replied. Somebody should have said something. One of us should have objected, but no one said a word. Jade stared around with a look that fell between angry and disappointed. We were all struggling to accept Jade's words and trying our best to conceal it from each other. We couldn't understand the bombshell he had just dropped. He had basically just told the entire Legion that if it wasn't for Sam, their parents would be alive.
"Because,"
he replied angrily,
"that kid didn't do anything to deserve hell, and neither did his brother, so they fought to get his brother, and they fought to save him. It would have been cowardly, and they can blame Sam for their problems if they want, but at least they had someone."
As he spoke, his eyes sparked with anger. I had never seen Jade so infuriated. He looked like he was going to blow his top.
"He had no one,"
he replied, snapping us all back to earth.
"So, I am truly sorry for your loss. Yes, you lost parents, but no one has had to endure what that kid has. And if you're going to have feelings about him that mirror the short-sighted bigots in this realm, then I severely misjudged the integrity of this Legion."
He stared us over, shaking his head in disappointment before continuing.
"Regardless, he won't hear any of this. If he does, you'll have to deal with me,"
he continued angrily. A look of bewildered regret covered the face of nearly every face in the room.
"We didn't mean,"
I sputtered.
"Don't try it,"
Jade replied, cutting me off.
"I have been doing this longer than you, Tim. That feeling I felt was anger, and it was all aimed at an innocent kid who is more a victim than any of you. I am disappointed in all of you, aside from Jacob. The BAUs I got from the rest of you who lost parents? I understand you're young, but I expected more. Regardless, Tim, you will accompany him and you both are going back to Earth."
"Wait, what?" I asked, surprised by his outburst. "Why me?" Jade stared at me with a look that almost caused me to swallow my tongue.
"It's you because it requires the talent you have. Your diversity is needed because there is no telling what is required to accomplish this mission," he replied, pausing in an annoyed manner. "You will be going back to Earth. Understand, this is not a normal undertaking. Because of Sam's low score, he was given a special mission. It is an E-rank mission."
"What?" Eve cut in. "That isn't fair." Jacob scoffed in a matter-of-fact type tone. "No, it is. A person with a 1 has relatively accomplished nothing, so they have to be beyond reproach. You can't just give them a run-of-the-mill undertaking. Unfortunately, Tim's decision led to Sam's predicament," Jacob replied. "It's only right. He should be the one to help him." I acknowledged Jacob's words. He was right. This was my chance to make a wrong right. Suddenly, my spirit changed. I now was intent on making sure Sam made it. Jacob was right. This was my chance, and I was going to make it right.
"Tim was nearly killed the last time he went there," Eve cut in. "What? How can they do this?"
She seemed like she was about to break down. Over her time training with us, the three of us had developed a bond. It killed her to hear we'd both be risking our lives for the sake of some trial.
"Can we just forfeit? Why risk it? Like Tim said, who cares about the Academy? We've been trained by angels. Couldn't Jade, Max, and Hans continue?" she cut in a pleading manner. "Evelyn, the Light Guard Academy affords you guys domain, power, and resources we could never match alone. Is it impossible to protect the witnesses without the resources of Light Guard Academy? Of course not. But hear me when I say, the chances of success are drastically cut. Without the Academy, you guys would have no right to be here. You'd be sent back to the Earth realm. As you know, time there is different. There is no way you'd be able to put in the years of training you could here. You would have months before literal hell would be let loose, and you'd be completely abandoned by the Light Guard. I'm sorry, that would be suicide."
I shook my head angrily.
"If you knew that, why did you let us make that promise to Sam?" I shot, staring at the man, blown away by his revelation. "Why did you give us the impression that we had a chance to do this without the trials?" "Because it doesn't matter," Jade fired. "You made a promise. Honor it."
"What does that mean?" Sai cut in.
"It means get ready for the trials," he responded vaguely, before angrily walking off the transport.
We all sat, frustrated, staring vacantly around the transport, waiting for someone to speak. Once again, Uriah took the lead, standing and turning toward me. "I'll help you guys," Uriah cut in, standing, gripping the seat as emotion ran through him.
"I'll go over that undertaking with a fine-toothed comb, and any way I can help, I will. Forget the odds. Faith dictates reality, right? Maybe we should stop relying on our gifts and start relying on our faith. That's why we're here, isn't it? We're the Theta Delta Legion. We're the Legion that had demons in fear before we knew who we were. We're done losing. We're done being less. We hold the cards. Our faith has made these so-called experts look like fools on too many times to count. Nothing we've done has been easy. Most of it's been downright impossible. But that's what faith is. It's the faith in the unseen. And if that faith dictates our circumstance, let's start dictating."
We all sat up attentively, taking in the boy's words before Pete rose, inspired.
"I'll help too,"
Pete replied with a nod of his head.
"Let us know if you need our help," Sai replied. "It's the least we can do considering how we just acted."
"Exactly," Pete replied. His words had breathed life into our Legion, as we all rose with determined demeanors, slowly exiting the transport. I walked through the crowd of reporters as they all flocked past me to get to Jacob. He signaled for us to keep going, stopping to answer questions so that the rest of us could get into the hotel without a problem. I nodded in appreciation as we all trotted inside. Sai moved to the side, letting the rest of the guys pass before grabbing me and pulling me next to her.
I'll see you guys in a little bit,
she said to Eve and Danny with a smile. I stood, thrown by her actions, as Eve responded.
Yeah, my sister has her last checkup,
Eve added.
So we'll just check back up when she gets her final release.
Sai nodded as Eve, Beth, and Danielle disappeared in a show light.
Me and Uriah will go and look over the specs of the undertaking,
Pete added, shaking my hand before exiting as well. Sai and I stood in place as everyone else dispersed in light. I stood, confused by her actions, before she finally turned to me.
I don't like Jacob,
she shot through a clenched false smile as she waved to our exiting Legion mates. What? I responded, thrown.
I'm not acting when I say I don't like Jacob. I promise you, I don't like Jacob,
she shot, begging me to believe her. I nodded, accepting her words, still confused about why she felt it important enough to pull me to the side. I fumbled before pressing her. Okay, if it's not Jacob, you've stated on too many times to count it wasn't me, Pete, or Sam, I continued. Who is this mystery guy? She stared at me, angrily shoving me. I winced with a chuckle as she shook her head, sarcastically frustrated as she continued, unable to hold back a snicker. Don't worry about it, she fired, causing a soothing calm to come over me that I didn't understand at that time. First, don't believe everything a girl says truly encapsulates what's in her mind. Second, you used the word crush, not me. Third and final, I'll bite. Jacob, Pete, Sam, and especially you, like you said to Eve, I'm not blind. I can't help it. I think it's totally weird, but I find myself being attracted to you. Not you, but boys. I mean, you specifically are attractive to me too. I know I should have let you know, but it's an awkward thing to admit. I want to wait until I'm old enough to get married, but now that I see all the, good guys around me being swiped up, you're right. I'm jealous. I'm starting to wonder if they'll still be around when I'm able to pursue them. Her words came out in an exaggerated, humor-filled sigh. She lowered her head bashfully as I stood in awkward silence before bursting into a chuckle. She stared around the lobby, embarrassed, before slugging me in the arm. Tim, stop it, she shot, unable to quell a chuckle of her own. Don't make me regret telling you that, you idiot. I continued to chuckle as she slugged me again. I smiled, appreciatively goading her more before finally responding. Well, Miss Hikari, color me flattered, I poked, staring her up and down. She blushed once again before placing her head in her hand, visibly embarrassed as she chuckled nervously. Sai, I appreciate you being honest, I shot, walking over to her and placing my arm over her shoulders. And in the spirit of being upfront with each other, the feeling is mutual. Pete and I talk about it all the time. Sai, you're a beautiful girl, and at times it can be awkward navigating that for both of us. I should have stopped there, but it was like the freedom of speaking and telling her the pent-up feelings I had put me in a trance. I stared into her eyes as she blushed awkwardly at my candid words. My gosh, and that kiss, I continued, causing her eyes to widen. It was like I tried for weeks to get it out of my head, but I couldn't. It was amazing. She nodded, continuing to let me talk. It was obvious what her aim was, but my mind was nowhere near as mature as hers was at the time. I continued to speak, unable to stop venting the pent-up emotions in me. To be honest, I should have told you immediately. We're friends, but who says it has to end there? I paused, catching myself as she crossed her arms, covering her mouth, hiding a provoking chuckle. I closed my eyes playfully as embarrassment filled me.
"Oh, please, don't let me stop you, Mr. Eli,"
she joked in the same vein as my poke moments earlier, stirring my embarrassment. I shook my head, nodding, accepting my punishment as she smiled in a vindicated manner. I stared at her in a way that drained the humor from both our faces.
"Well, if you truly are serious about keeping this thing between us the same,"
I responded, continuing to stare at her like we were the only two people in the room, "you should watch that smile." She stared at me, thrown by my words. I quickly fumbled, trying to cover for the flub the candid vibe between us caused me to spill.
"I mean, it's a nice smile. Or you have a nice smile,"
I responded, flustered.
"Which is super awkward for one friend to say to another friend, I know, but..."
I stood, dying a slow death as she stared at me, unapologetically smitten. We both were stuck in an awkward lull as a saving voice cut in.
"Tim,"
said the voice, causing both of us to turn. I turned to see Sean, and almost on reflex, I sighed. After what had just happened at the trials, he was the last guy I wanted to see, but considering the circumstance, I would take it. I nodded in his direction as he approached me.
"Hi, Sai,"
he greeted, causing the girl to acknowledge his words with a nod before he continued apologetically.
"Look, I just want you to know that what happened today, you know, the thing with the guys..."
We both nodded, remembering the interaction from earlier in the day. He pointed behind him symbolically, even though there wasn't anyone standing in the direction of his point.
"I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. The guys, they were out of line,"
he expressed regretfully. I nodded, not really wanting to get into a discussion about it.
"Yeah, thanks. It's no big deal. We were kind of out of line ourselves," I replied.
I nodded, feeling self-conscious about the abrupt way in which I knew I was going to have to end the conversation. But regardless, I had a lot of work ahead of me, and Sai and I had wasted enough time as it stood. I had to go.
"I wish I could talk about it, but I'm kind of in a rush,"
I replied, throwing my bag over my shoulder.
"Okay, cool. I'll come with you,"
he replied.
"I have something I need to ask you."
I looked at him with a look that fell between startled and taken back. "Okay, sure," I replied, not really knowing how to respond.
"Tim, I'm going to go meet up with the girls. It was nice to, get things out. Honestly, I feel a lot better,"
she responded, giving me a hug. I nodded, taking in the aroma of her rosy perfume. Deep down, I didn't want to end the conversation there. I grimaced awkwardly, releasing her as she turned to leave. I stood in a trance, watching her walk around as Pete and Uriah appeared, startling me.
"Tim,"
Pete uttered.
"we have..."
The two boys paused as they noticed Sean. I continued walking toward the elevator as the three boys followed me. A part of me was skeptical of Sean's motives, seeing as we were getting ready to embark on one of the most important trials of the competition. Pete and Uriah watched with suspicious looks on their faces as we approached the elevator. I cut Pete a look that told the story in a glance. I had no idea what his motives were, but the guy had been nothing short of a stand-up guy. Truthfully, Sean saved our lives at the expense of his own, and he had earned the trust of a conversation.
"Hi,"
he greeted, speaking to Uriah and Pete as he boarded the elevator. Pete and Uriah nodded uneasy as he nestled into the elevator.
"I know you guys are wondering why I'm here,"
he replied, turning toward us.
"But something has been on my mind since I arrived here, and to make a long story short, I'm from Angel Haven, and like the majority of parents in Angel Havens, my father was a protector."
I looked at Pete like Sean was talking Chinese.
"Protector?"
Pete responded. Sean stopped, surprised we didn't know what he was talking about.
"Well, as I am sure you know, Angel Haven was built by religious settlers," he responded, waiting for us to fill in the blank. who were looking to escape religious persecution in the first religious wars of the early 2050s. We glared at him with dense expressions before he sighed in an annoyed tone. Man, your teachers weren't too thorough with the history, were they? He replied with a straight face. I shrugged, acknowledging his statement. He looked at Pete and his demeanor changed. Or it could have been intentional, he replied. Maybe things changed in our generation. After your family moved out, my father says a lot changed. I looked at him like he was crazy. My family never moved out, I responded, confused. Not your family, his family, he replied, pointing directly at Uriah. Uriah looked as surprised as the rest of us. Sean shook his head in frustration. News to me, Uriah replied. The elevator stopped as he sighed. We walked off the elevator as he continued. Well, most of the stuff is in the Heaven Realm database. I've been studying my hometown for years. I know it like the back of my hand, he continued, with a look that showed a slight bit of regret about what he disclosed. Regardless, these protectors were normal Earthborn people with basic light aura training. My father, like many, if not all the parents in Angel Haven, was a protector. They were the eyes and ears of the remnants, but that isn't my point. My point is, from the minute I knew, what was coming, I wanted to help. At first I thought I could possibly help in the small ways that I could, but after realizing what was at stake, I've realized that won't be enough. Those people are just as much my people as any of yours. I shouldn't be a part of a legion that is striving to bar you guys from saving those people. It just doesn't seem right. We all turned to him inquisitively at the sound of his words. The trial against Pete, it was eating at me, he replied solemnly. I'm from Angel Haven. I should be with you guys, not against you. I nodded, almost involuntary, as I almost heard his words before he said them. So, if you guys would have me, he continued, I would like to be a part of your legion. We all stood by in shock without saying a word for a second before I sputtered. Sure, I replied, gun-shy, if it isn't against the rules. Pete and Uriah just stood still, not saying anything. I was skeptical. Was it some type of trick? A mind game right before the trial? Thanks, he replied. It's not against the rules. I was accepted into the academy. I can do what I want. I met my obligation to the Alpha House by competing and winning my trial. Besides, they were never really my style to begin with. I belong with you guys. I'm an Earthborn guy from Angel Haven, and it would make my father proud to see me representing his Earthborn home and serving the greater good. I mean, how many people can say they saved their home world? We all just shook his hand, not really knowing how or what we were supposed to do to cement the deal. It was an epic turn of events, but I had nothing. I was never really a people person, mostly because I never really knew how to react in emotional situations. Sean kind of half shook my hand and half stood there as his attention turned to the door just behind us. As he did, Kel arose from the room with an agitated look on his face. Sean, he replied, Abby just said you were switching out on us? Sean turned, not wanting to reply. The kid looked visually affected. He stood staring at Sean in an exhausted stance before turning to us like we were pariah. I'm not switching. I'm not competing anymore. I'll still be rooting for you guys, but my fate is in theirs, Sean continued, visibly contrite. I'm sorry. It's no offense to you guys. We've been through a lot together. But in the end, a lot of you guys are heaven-born, and that's fine. But honestly, you don't understand how Abby and I feel. To you guys, this is just a game. It's not for us. This is our home realm. We shouldn't be the ones to stop our chosen legion. I don't want that on my family's name. I just can't do it. Kel nodded in an understanding manner, but still looked like he would sooner spit on us. And where is your friend? He said spitefully.
Right here, said Sam, catching us all off guard. He turned to Sam and looked down at him like he was insignificant and chuckled. Leo's going to destroy this kid, he replied with a chuckle. After everything I heard, I wasn't going to sit by and let anyone insult Sam anymore. What did you say? I replied, walking towards him. He looked at me with a look that fell between intimidated and angry. As he did, Leo and Cadmiel exited their room. I acted as if I didn't see them as I continued my march. Tim, stop, Pete replied, cutting me off. I know how you feel, but if we get caught, we'll lose the competition and Sam won't be able to enter the academy. In the end, what did you really do? I paused, wanting to punch something as I stopped, my momentum agreeing with his words. Cadmiel antagonized me with a smile that ate at me, and without thinking about the consequences, I just reacted. I blinked, sending a slicing wind to her hair that dropped her to her knees. Tim, Pete replied. Wham! Kel hit Pete with a wind blow that nearly sent him through the hallway wall. Pete, I replied, leaping into action. Pop! Wham! I hit the tall kid with a punch and finished him off with a roundhouse that left him unconscious against a nearby wall. Kel! Cadmiel cried, storming toward me. Whoosh! I conjured a dense wind, and with a spinning swipe I slammed her into a nearby wall with earth-shattering force that left her lying next to Kel. Leo stood staring at me, focused on each movement. But before I could make a move, my body seemed to stop in mid-step. I couldn't move. I was stuck. Chill, Uriah replied. It was him. He was using some type of subatomics. I looked at Leo and neither one of us could move. This altercation was a dispute, nothing more. Since neither one of us want our Legion mates to be disqualified, we'll just keep this altercation to ourselves, he replied, finally releasing us. Agreed? I exhaled, finally able to move freely as Leo nodded, scooping up Kel and Cadmiel. He turned to me with a lasting look before disappearing into their room. You okay? Uriah replied, staring at me. I nodded as Sean helped Pete to his feet. They all looked at me like I was some type of freak. Your speed, Sam replied, staring at me. How could you do that? Do what? I replied. I've always been fast. They looked me over, still not letting me in on the secret. Not that fast, Uriah added. I wouldn't be surprised if you picked up a few more traits from watching your brother. I looked over at them, not even acknowledging his words as I turned to Sam. At the time, it wasn't important. I shrugged it off, turning to Sam. I'm going with you, I replied, and we're going to train until you make each and every one of those jerks eat their words.